I had programmed to release this book, God is Loving You, as an open source audiobook on December 20th, the fourth Sunday of Advent. But since I have dedicated this book to Jesus, I have decided to release this 1,000-word book in its entirety on Christmas Day 2020, in homage to Jesus and his faith, which went beyond the comprehension of man. Jesus brought to the world a message which humanity has still not comprehended, and it is truly time to understand God's original plan and live his message of love. This excerpt from the book is the fourth chapter. I hope this chapter and the whole book will point you towards your true direction, love.
God is loving you. Activate your GPS system and live God's 100%. By Evelyn Carr.
Dedication. In my entire life of continuous conversations with God, I have only asked God 3 questions. In 1969, at the age of 7, as I was going home from church one day, I was feeling a bit confused about the messages which I had heard earlier on during the sermon. I asked God, "Who is Jesus?" God immediately answered me, "Jesus is your brother." 40 years later, in 2009, I asked God if all of my suffering was his true will. In that very moment, he told me, "I have to give you all this pain. Otherwise, you will never understand and you will not be able to help them." In 2019, I asked God a third question. Why is there all this pain in the world? Again, he responded instantly and said to me, "Because they do not know how to love." I dedicate this book to Jesus, my brother, whose life example helped me understand the depths of the meaning of true unconditional love and of incorruptibility, and what it means to possess an unwavering faith in God. My life I dedicate to God. Chapter 4, 2020. Check and checkmate. Are we writing the end or the beginning of our story? I'm an avid science fiction fan, and I've probably seen every apocalyptic movie ever made. And believe me, thousands of these films have been produced. In these movies, we are depicted as human beings who have lived with no regard for the planet, for ourselves, for others, for our health, for other species and life forms, for the atmosphere, for the universe, for God, and for basically everything possible. At a certain point in these movies, something backfires, and we are all on a downward spiral and headed towards the end of the world. The very fact that these movies exist mean that we are aware that there is something wrong with how we are living, that we are flirting with disaster, and that we are ignoring the urgency of the situation. But it always seems like we have decided to just plod along in the same direction for as long as we possibly can. Why is it that we seem to never learn and change by evolving and by eliminating our problems in a definitive manner? I'd like to share with you my autobiographical apocalyptic story called 2020 Check and Checkmate. I think that this may be the first time that these two genres have ever been associated together, unfortunately. The night of March 1st, 2020, I was feeling very satisfied and hopeful for the future. I had just held a very moving and positive webinar for people following my free online course for completely healing from fibromyalgia called I Want to Heal. For years, I had been warning people to fortify themselves and to do all they could do to leave pain, sickness, and suffering behind before 2020. And I felt that the message was now finally sinking into people's consciousness. I had witnessed over the years that it usually takes about 5 or 6 years for people to understand and to assimilate the concepts I introduced to them, and I had been speaking about the need for definitively changing course in 2020 for about 5 years. A new year, and especially a new year called 2020, a term synonymous with clear, precise, outstanding, perfect vision, had given everyone an injection of hope. The people in my courses were feeling stronger and were seeing the reality around them in an ever increasingly clearer manner. That night, people were giving me feedback, telling me that they had understood that they were living in a society which, in their words, resembled a jungle, and they expressed how happy they were to finally understand that there was no need for them to live in this manner. They were becoming aware of their power and that they possessed the capacity to live lives free of pain if they stopped permitting themselves to be conditioned by others. Learning to focus on one's own life and on raising one's own standards in a world in which personal standards keep falling to new lows was a challenge for them, just as transmitting this message in an effective manner had been a challenge for me. That night I was feeling that 2020 was going to be the year in which people understood their power and were going to make the choice to undertake a definitive change in their lives and choose to live free from suffering. After the webinar, I sat relaxing on my couch while watching the television when I felt God embrace my body and hold me tight. It was as if I were being held in a tight lock without the possibility of movement, but the iron hold was immersed in love. God wanted to give me a vision that He knew I would refuse wanting to see. So He surrounded me with an iron embrace infused with pure, profound, and reassuring love. I did not understand what was going on or why I couldn't move my body or my eyes. God did not say a word. A horrible vision started passing before my eyes, like terrible scenes from a series of different disaster movies. God had started showing me the rest of 2020, with scenes from all over the world. One after another, I saw scenes of rioting, bombings, people fighting in the streets, financial disaster, deaths, millions of deaths from the COVID virus, and many more deaths from suicides. I saw outbreaks of racism, hatred, and terrible scenes of hunger and poverty affecting people all over the world. I witnessed an unprecedented increase in crime, the proliferation of organized crime, robberies, and corruption, which were all going to grow in levels due to the chaos. I saw social unrest, and that poor people, especially the new wave of poor people who would suddenly find themselves in economic difficulty, would begin hating rich people, and that the wealthy would live in fear of the poor. I saw brother against brother. I also saw that the virus would mutate and that this would cause ulterior problems in the future. In that moment, I was not only witnessing what was going to happen in the near future, but God imprinted His vision on my mind by letting me also feel exactly what all the millions of people I saw in His vision were feeling at that moment. I not only saw a worldwide disaster, but He also made me feel it. I felt the fear in people being hospitalized with complications due to the COVID virus and their terror of dying. I felt the desolation and the immense sadness of those who were about to lose their businesses, houses, jobs, and financial savings. I saw and felt the last minutes of people's lives before they committed suicide. I felt the anger, fear, delusion, and rage of children who were caught in a world that they could not understand. I saw bombs blow up in my face, and I felt the terror. I found myself in the middle of riots with chaos and things burning all around me. I saw the graves from the people who died of COVID, but I also saw that the deaths due to what was to come after the COVID crisis were much greater than those of the crisis itself. I felt the hunger. I felt what it was like to die of hunger. God showed me what was to happen in Africa, India, and many other countries, and the poverty, the famine, and the looks of desolation on the faces of people in endless lines broke my heart to the core. I saw lines all over the world. People were in lines for water, food, medicine, help, and everything in general. I saw countries taking advantage of the distraction caused by this world chaos and starting wars with neighboring states. I saw an economic crisis of biblical proportions caused by a lockdown which hadn't yet occurred in Italy, where I was residing at the time. At that point in time, we had experienced about a few hundred cases of people with COVID, and about 35 deaths had been reported in Italy. Today, there are close to 2 million cases in Italy, and there have been 60,000 deaths. At the time God showed me this vision, the United States had reported only one case of death from COVID. Today, the numbers are reported to be close to 2 million deaths worldwide and 70 million cases of contagion in the world at this moment. The vision God showed me the night of March 1st, 2020 could have never been imaginable and seemed like complete and utter science fiction at the time, but I knew it was true. Everything God has ever revealed to me has been accurate and the truth. As I watched this horrible vision which shook me to my very core, God held on to me even tighter and infused me with His love. I had never felt this level of His tangible love before, and it was the only thing that kept me from losing consciousness and fainting from shock as I watched how the future of humanity was to evolve during 2020. As the vision proceeded, I understood that the COVID crisis and the lockdown which followed would provoke a worldwide domino effect on economies, world stability, and on every human being's life. God showed me the utter futility of the way man would go about trying to contain the virus. He showed me countries in lockdown and others which were not, and the effects of those countries in lockdown would be in vain due to cross-contamination from people traveling. The thought of trying to contain a highly contagious virus spreading through a sick humanity which did not generally have healthy bodies was nonsense and a plan doomed to fail. But it was exactly what God showed me would happen. God showed me how the effect of the lockdown on the contagion was to be positive in Italy around the end of July and the beginning of August, but it was only temporary. He showed me how in September and October the numbers would rise again, but the COVID crisis would now be accompanied by an economic crisis, combined with the frustration, fear, and a sense of desolation in people all over the world. I saw the chaos, the confusion, the manipulation, and the coercion put into action by governments in conjunction with Big Pharma, who all envisioned a mega payday by the creation of the vaccine for COVID. I saw that all efforts were addressed towards holding out until a vaccine could be produced, and that this myopic vision, which focused almost entirely on the economic windfall from these future vaccines, always remember I said future vaccines as in plural, had made people in power blind to the devastating psychological, economical, and structural effects that long-term lockdowns would have on our society. During this horrible vision in March 2020, God told me, they are not emotionally capable of handling what is to come, and He wanted me to warn people of all of this. In November 2020, the psychiatric world started to notice that people were showing increased signs of becoming emotionally unstable due to living with the restrictions, the pressures, the fear, the economic problems, and the uncertainty caused by the COVID crisis. This was a factor which should have been considered first by everyone, and provision should have been made for this possible emotional crisis in people, in families, in children, in workers, and in our society in general. But as usual, this news of people succumbing to depressive states was reported like it was an unforeseen factor and a shock. And this is exactly how our society handles most situations, emergencies, and crises. In our society, situations are rarely addressed until they become full-blown emergencies, which is also the reason why these emergencies seem to be never-ending. This is also the way many people manage their lives. This is due to people's passivity towards pain and suffering. Worst of all, God showed me what was to happen in the coming years. Human bodies were sicker, much sicker, and this new fragile state of health, along with living in continuous fear, stress, and sadness, was to become the norm. Most of all, people who had intoxicated their bodies with experimental medicine would not want to see the correlation between what they had done to their bodies from 2020 on, and would further convince themselves that their unhealthy bodies were a sign of normal human impotency. I saw a man about to completely convince himself of his total impotency once and for all. I saw a man about to mistake Big Pharma as his savior and believe erroneously that medicines which were going to make him sicker in the future were actually the cure to making him stronger. I can't really say how long God's vision lasted, but to me it seemed like 15 to 20 minutes of pure agony. Can you imagine being bombarded by horrible emotions magnified billions of times? Not only did I feel these horrible emotions, but I also knew the stories behind them. It was like being privy to what everyone in the world was going through and was feeling for 15 devastating, interminable minutes. When God let go of his iron embrace, he left me with the words, "Tell them. I want to give them a choice. I want them to know why they are suffering. They have a choice. Tell them that I have faith in them." God told me to tell people of this vision and to warn them of what was coming. The vision also served to show that God is loving man and trying to save him, but that humanity is on a collision course for disaster. God told me, this is what will happen if they do not change. But it is not what has to happen. They can change all this if they accept to change. They are determining their own destiny. We are writing our own story, and our destiny is linked to each one of us finally understanding that we need to stop thinking that we all know the answers. Humanity's vision of the world is contaminated, and without a clear vision of the direction in which we should all be going in, we will wander, struggle, and continue to live like lost people. God had intended for man to evolve every day of his existence, generation after generation. This is how we would resemble the humanity he intended for us to become. We were not supposed to devolve and degenerate emotionally and physically and reduce ourselves to living in masks, awaiting our Savior in the form of a vaccine and fighting amongst ourselves. God's vision on March 1st, 2020 projected me ahead into the future for about 3 years. I saw 3 years of darkness, sickness, chaos, and emergencies. Please note the vision took me ahead only 3 years. This does not mean that things were better after 3 years, but just that this is as far into the future as I was permitted to see. What else could a humanity incapable of leaving pain and suffering, incapable of creating a definitive solution to end suffering, incapable of living and cultivating perfect health, possibly create? It is a mathematical equation. Our humanity has never had a direction. We do not know how to love. We refuse living in perfect health, have no regard for our planet, blame others, and do not take responsibility for our actions. We live as impotent beings. We strive to be listened to and to be considered by others, and so much more that I'm sure it's clear for you to see that this equation for disaster is simple math. God showed me the future if we do not change, and it was horrible. But I have to clear up two things. It was not the end of the world, and as time progressed, people would consider this horrible future normal. This is why I cried when God released me from his hold. My heart was broken. I was left with the knowledge and the certainty of a future which was even more devastating than the jungle that people had spoken about in the webinar I had held just a few hours before. I didn't just cry after this vision. I screamed, I had convulsions, I sobbed uncontrollably, and I kept reliving all the horrific scenes and feeling all the devastation in my body. It was like I was being hit with an endless series of emotional shock waves after an earthquake. I screamed and I cried all night, and I didn't stop for 22 long hours. I was able to finally control myself when I started to think about why God had given me this vision and all that pain. I knew that I would not be able to understand the reasons why God had shown me all this right at that moment, but I also knew that I had to regain control of my mind and my emotions if I were ever to interpret his will. God asked me to inform others, and after a huge amount of soul searching, I made a video explaining my vision and God's message. In the past few years, I have made many videos about my dialogue with God, his messages, and the year 2020. But this video was different. I made a video depicting in detail a future which not only seemed totally improbable at that moment, but a video in which I warned man of a future pandemic crisis. It takes a special kind of faith and trust in the Word of God to make an announcement in internet of death, disaster, sickness, destruction, and worldwide chaos which will happen in the very near future. This was the message which God gave to me, and I passed it on to people. Obviously, the response in March was that many people thought I was out of my mind. Many people were terrified and asked me to stop scaring them. People who had been listening to my messages for years were paralyzed with fear. But as the months went on, they were astonished that everything God had told me started to come true with surgical precision. I, on the other hand, was able to watch how people immediately became totally used to what had scared me to my core and had left them paralyzed with fear just weeks before. From March 1st until today, I have watched people transform a horrific, abnormal reality into a sort of temporary normality, and without people ever realizing what they were doing. For me, this was almost more frightening than God's terrible vision of our future, which has now become our reality. I witnessed in real time the atrocious capacity of the human mind to normalize the abominable, consider it the new version of life, and not see the need to go to the root of the problem. I had been trying to get people to leave pain and suffering for many years, and I had witnessed complete apathy and total resistance to this idea. Even before I made that video, I knew that a warning of the imminence of more pain and suffering would never push people to change. One of the greatest driving forces behind human motivation has been people's interactions with each other, not the fear of pain. People's actions have not been determined by the fear of pain and suffering. People have always been influenced by other people's thoughts, actions, and expectations. These social pressures are stronger than water eroding mountains, and even though God had told me that we were all capable of rewriting our story, I was overwhelmed with sadness. The world's destiny is tied to a humanity which cannot envision life without suffering, sickness, and pain. All my life I have watched people live in pain, and now the time had come where other people's pain was about to decide the stability of the world in which I live in. I found myself crying also because I felt handcuffed to the Titanic. I knew in my heart that things were going to unravel just as God had shown me. 2020, the worst year ever. This was the cover of the final December issue of one of the most famous magazines in the world. For a humanity which has based living life through a perspective of impotence, on false empty values, and on never pursuing one's personal evolution for the good of the collective, 2020 will be the worst year ever. But this will only be true during 2020. As 2021 rolls around, people will see that 2021 will be the worst year ever, as will 2022, unless every person decides to wake up, make a conscious decision for themselves on how to live, and starts to view the definitive solution of personal evolution as the only solution possible. The cycle of impotence and continuous decline will go on. In this cycle of impotence, humanity continues to create new disasters, while people will convince themselves that this is the lowest point we will reach, and that now something or someone will save us, and we will rise again. In this year of world crisis, I have seen a humanity virtually thrive off of pumped-up rhetoric through all channels of the mass media, from politicians and from opinion leaders. In 2020, I witnessed the creation of a continuous stream of positive, hopeful phrases for the future, which were completely void of substance and totally unrealistic, but seemed to have the soporific effect of potent sleeping pills, lulling everyone into a social coma and creating future fantasies. I also witnessed people fight about everything and anything possible, practically living off of controversy, which served as a massive distraction, taking attention off the real problem and the solution. Human beings are sick, have weak bodies, and live in a way which is detrimental to themselves and to others. The time for this emotionally and mentally immature and myopic view of life must cease. The year 2020 has knocked down all the illusions which were helping people to live their lives of pain, while they were convincing themselves that things were normal. The house of cards, which was helping people to ignore the reality around them, has come crashing down, and it is grotesque and tragically ridiculous to see all that people will do to avoid finally taking responsibility for themselves. Taking responsibility for oneself means taking care of our health, our planet, our future, our children, our collective, our families, our future generations, and the idea of life itself. Yes, because people have lost the awareness of the meaning of life itself. Children who are born today do not know the meaning of life because they are raised by people who themselves are all searching, and in the wrong places, for the meaning of their own lives. A humanity searching for the meaning of life is grotesque. It is truly abnormal, but it is what has happened around us while society has grown in an aberrant direction, light years away from what God had intended for man to live. 2020 will not be the worst year ever, but it could be the year in which humanity decides to stop, take stock, understand that we were going in the wrong direction, and accept the love and guidance of God, also through the information contained in this book. 2020 will not be the worst year ever if people understand that they have never really known God, because they have never really known how to love and interpret love. Man has interpreted God through the eyes and the hearts of impotent men who sought power and never realized that they were born powerful. These people in turn did all they could to never let others also know of their own intrinsic power. The version of God which followed this interpretation of power has been a God of wrath, judgment, righteousness, inequality, abuse of power, and impotence. This version of God has reflected man, not God, and has been developed over the centuries by men who were continuously lost and who have perfected this language of pain and impotence over the years. 2020 will not be the worst year ever if man understands that to be able to understand God, one must be able to love. The God I know is unknown to man because people interpret God through the eyes of impotency and not through the eyes of love and power. Love is power, and God is love. I have lived in a world where when I spoke of power, I intended love, wisdom, understanding, patience, faith, gentleness, compassion, hope, and inner strength. When people heard the word power, they thought instead of prevarication, winning and losing, competing, bullying, fear, succumbing, money, brute force, denigration, personal satisfaction, being respected, roles and titles, and proving that you are better than someone else, or fearing that you are not. This is not power. This is not God's version of power. And we have the opportunity in 2020 to understand that this should not be considered as power in any universe. This is a recipe for disaster implemented by people who have never known the direction in which humanity should have been proceeding, because people have never known how to interpret God, love, and power. God, love, and power are synonyms. They all mean the same thing, but to understand the true meaning of these three synonyms, man must make a giant leap in evolution and want to learn from the debacle of 2020. 2020 will not be our worst year ever, because if we do not learn from it, every year after 2020 will be our worst year ever. In reality, we should actually strive to make 2020 our worst year ever. We should strive to vigorously learn all the lessons that human passivity has caused in our world. We should strive to make 2020 our lowest point. Only then will every year after 2020 mark a comeback for humanity, a humanity which is now on its true direction of evolution, the personal interior evolution of every person on the planet. It's time to understand that right now we are playing chess with our lives, and that we are all playing against ourselves to lose. We must change direction, and that change must occur within each and every one of us in a personal and profound manner. People trained to suffer, to ignore, and to adapt to suffering, and who are not looking for the definitive way to stop suffering, are playing a dangerous game of chess with humanity's destiny and are bound to lose. It's just a question of time before there are no more palliative moves which can be made to continue losing while thinking that we are winning. A humanity in which billions of people are driven by their own personal impotence is creating the aberrant world around us and has brought us to 2020 and check. This is the reason behind all the chaos you see around you, and why life has never been a happy, satisfactory journey for the majority of humanity. But we are now running out of moves. God is trying to inform us that our next moves will one day be checkmate if we continue to adopt our impotent but presumptuous view on life and persevere in our downward spiral towards destruction. We all have to decide who we are, but first you must know who you are in God's eyes. God's plan is to reveal to you who you really are and to let you become aware of the certainty that you are His miracle and that you are powerful. This is how He has bestowed upon you a choice. It will now be up to you in what way you decide to use your new sense of self and this new freedom of choice. A God of wisdom and love will never punish us. God is trying to save us from the punishment we are inflicting upon ourselves. God is loving us and trying to save us from ourselves. But this can only be done if we, as a humanity, learn how to love. We must finally understand that what until now we have considered to be love was not love, because true love exists when it is born from power. Once again, we must finally understand that what we have considered as power was masked impotence and not power. Love is power, and power is love, and God is love and power. To understand the true meaning of my words, people must have the courage to embark on a personal journey of interior growth, discarding the deleterious meanings of these words which they have learned in the cattle herding compound. It's time for you to understand that 2020 could be your best year ever, and the year that you understand that you were following people who were in pain and thus lost, or maybe it was you leading the pack and you were in pain and lost. 2020 is the year of choice. God is love and offers choices to us all. God will never oblige you to love. The phrase itself sounds ridiculous, right? Unfortunately, this is not only what many religions profess, love God or else, but this is also how people love in their relationships and in their families. Love me or else. And the stalking, the killing, and the abuse in personal relationships demonstrates this all around us. Every single day of the year we witness examples of this incapacity to love. But we call this atrocity normal. A humanity which does not know the true meaning of love or how to love will view these aberrant behaviors as normal. People who are living and do not know their true direction will normalize anything they live, and they will keep going on, persevering in the wrong direction precisely because they do not have a direction. The end of the story 2020 Check and Checkmate has not yet been written, and depends on the decision each and every person chooses to make for their lives. In every science fiction apocalyptic movie there is a savior. People want saviors. In this story, we are all our own saviors. We will write the end of this story together as a humanity by choosing to finally save ourselves. Saving yourself is an immense act of love. Each person must think solely about saving themselves through profound self-love, and thus freeing themselves from a life of pain. God has an undying faith in all of us, and through his plan of love, he has given us a choice. 2020 Check and Checkmate is an apocalyptic, autobiographical story based on a mathematical equation. Pain is simple math. Happiness is also math, just as the inevitability of a worldwide disaster for our humanity was an almost perfect equation and was destined to happen due to one cause or another. God had explained to me as a child the existence which he desired for man to live during our journey on earth, and he has always told me that it was to be lived by 100%. Following the concept of 100% would guarantee our evolution. To universal wisdom, this was the perfect equation for a paradisical existence and the illuminated evolutionary development of the world. Every human being living with an immense, ever-growing self-love, self-respect, and an undying desire to discover themselves by 100% meant evolution. Human beings living and cultivating their perfect health and desiring to keep themselves strong, physically and emotionally, by 100% every day of their lives meant evolution. People refusing to live in pain and suffering by 100% meant evolution. People living with honesty, integrity, coherency, respect, kindness, and courage by 100% meant evolution. Miracles, who all lived always being aware of their immense power by 100%, meant evolution. Human beings respecting the planet, all other life forms, the atmosphere, and always making decisions which ensured the continuous betterment of our world, meant evolution. God's plan was math. Our plan for destruction, in which we have always disregarded ourselves, our planet, our health, other human beings, and our future as a collective, was also math. Life is unpredictable, to say the least, but if you handle everything in your life based on the implementation of God's directives for living a life of 100%, you will modify the variables of life to such an extent that you will generally have a wonderful, peaceful, happy, healthy existence during your journey on earth. Living God's equation of a life of 100% is a perfect equation for harmony, wisdom, and continuous evolution, as He had intended it. If it happens that you are the only one living your 100%, I can tell you firsthand that the result is a sublime, beautiful, rich, significant existence. If 8.5 billion people decide to participate and live by 100%, the result is even more beautiful to behold. But one's personal journey of 100% is still beautiful beyond belief. It's pure math, probability, statistics, and the sums of our actions. I am a visionary, but I am a realist. Life is math. Living in pain is math. Living with happiness and perfect health is math. A compounding equation which grows with every year we exist on this planet. Man has lived with 100% acceptance of pain, sickness, and suffering, generation after generation, and God had instead asked us to live with 100% acceptance of happiness, perfect health, freedom, and joy. The inevitability of the arrival of a year such as 2020 was a simple but still complex mathematical equation. As I stated, I'm a realist, and I have observed human behavior all my life, mostly because God had asked me to do this. I know that there is a 100% probability that for a long while the evolution of the lie will travel alongside the evolution of the truth. The ability of lies to grow, to camouflage themselves as truths, and to manipulate reality in our society is utterly amazing. Always remember that not only will you yourself resist leaving pain and living God's 100%, but everything around you, other people, the government, family members, friends, the mass media, the social media, businesses, big pharma, and society in general will create lies and smokescreens to lure you back once again into a life of pain. Like vines growing around your ankles or a magnetic force field pulling you backwards, things around you will give you the illusion of change, but they will in reality still be the same. Passivity must be eliminated by 100%. Passivity and apathy towards oneself and one's betterment must be eliminated by 100%. Low self-esteem, which always makes people consider what others think as more important than what they themselves think, must be eliminated by 100%. Low self-esteem also drives people to live without scruples and often pushes people to do truly unthinkable actions if it means obtaining what that person wants and desires. The acceptance of incoherency, of lies, and of corruption must be eliminated by 100%. The use of rhetoric, especially in commercials and publicity, and the usage of empty phrases and promises, especially by our political leaders, must be eliminated by 100%. The need to look for a leader, to want to lead others, to want to be followed, or to want to follow others must be eliminated by 100%. And this is the antithesis to the evolution of our humanity as God had intended it. It's time to understand that what you may have once thought was power was actually impotence masked as power. This illusion can only exist when you live as an impotent being. Otherwise, your vision becomes 20/20 and all the lies and the manipulations around you become crystal clear. Listening to people who themselves live in pain and who want to tell you how to better live in your own life of pain must be eliminated by 100%. People who live in pain only know how to survive living in pain by implementing hundreds of strategies on a continuous basis, while they are convinced, however, that they are awake and living at best. Listening to people who tell you how to obtain all the crumbs and shiny objects that the cattle herding compound has told them will make us all happy, and they are now passing on their contaminated know-how to you, must be eliminated by 100% from your life, as they are the true bearers of a social virus. Unfortunately, in 2020, these people are ever growing in numbers and spreading faster than COVID. Listening to people who do not consider every human being as equal and have put themselves on a higher level of importance than others must be eliminated. The acceptance of thinking of oneself as a victim and as impotent and as being in need of being saved, as being unworthy. It's ridiculous for miracles to consider themselves as unworthy, or as being incapable in general, must be eliminated by 100%. If you factor into your own personal equation these directives and implement them by God's evolutionary number of 100%, you can start at a lower number and live your life always working towards your ever-evolving 100%. You will always be able to see the evolution of the lies around you and stay well ahead of them, thus avoiding to be put to sleep once again by the lies of man. Always remember that there are people all over the world who are banking on your future passivity, fear, sickness, sense of impotence and acceptance towards pain and suffering, and are creating products, messages, programs, protests, conspiracy theories, and self-help strategies to cater to your sense of weakness. Remember the sweeper buses which I refused when I was running the New York Marathon? Well, there will be sweeper buses disguised in all sorts of unsuspecting forms in your future. Remember how I eliminated contact with my friends for the period in which I was healing from fibromyalgia because I didn't want to be enticed by their looks of pity and their need to help me, which would have lulled me into a false sense of impotence? I chose to believe in myself and summon my God-given power to evolve and to grow from within, because I wanted to live my 100%. There will be many traps on your way out of the cattle herding compound of pain and suffering, but God is by your side, and if you implement His directives, you will activate your GPS system and will remain firmly on your path no matter what the world or your subconscious mind will throw at you. I choose to interpret God's vision and His lesson to humanity in 2020 in the best way possible, and I personally choose to be the change I want to see in my world. I will continue to lead my life by focalizing on my own personal evolution by following God's plan for me to live His 100% as He has asked us all to do. This is my contribution to humanity. My life will breathe of coherency, of truth, of me focusing only on the betterment of my actions and of me possessing the faith that others will, one day, in their own time, be willing to see that they too are powerful and free. If I want to really embrace God's 2020 message, I must focus on my own continuous evolution as a powerful, loving miracle who treats all other miracles around me with respect, with understanding, and with the acknowledgement of equality and with a sense of love. If one day 8.5 billion people decide to do the same thing, our world will be paradise. But until then, I will continue to be the expression of the humanity God intended to create. This is my gift of love to God and my personal contribution to mankind. Me, at my best, and on my personal journey towards God's evolution. I am the change I want to see around me. I am the living example of the power of God's love, today and tomorrow. I am the living testimony that man can live in perfect health, with no fear, with no pain, with inner happiness and joy, with a sense of power, with profound serenity and calmness, with abounding self-love, with mental and emotional freedom, and with a faith which is based solely on an unconditional love for God. God gave me the recipe to perfect health and the key to a long, happy existence, and I choose to live that existence by being an example, by showing what is possible through real love and real faith. Everything in a contaminated body of water becomes contaminated one day unless one's source is pure. I will live a long, happy, uncontaminated life and in perfect health because my source is pure. Therefore, I'm immune to the contamination all around me. When I was a very young girl, God told me to always be incorruptible years before I knew what the word meant. Now, in 2020, I understand His message. This is what God asks of us all. To have the personal courage to be an example of what it means to live with truth, love, power, and purity, by God's standards and not by man's. In other words, incorruptible. For a large part of my life, my friends and most people around me have never known that I have always had a dialogue with God, and they probably would not think of me as a religious person. My interior dialogue with God was the sweetest, the most beautiful, and the most fulfilling truth in my life. I have never considered myself as religious. I am simply in love with God. I love the way God loves me. I love His wisdom, His care, His patience, His compassion, and His understanding. I love our intimate relationship, and I love helping Him in any way I can to bring about His plan of an evolved and illuminated humanity. I have lived every day of my life evolving as He had directed me to do since I was a child, for love, and life has always been exciting to me. Following greatness is incredible. I have passed the days of my life asking myself what I could do for God. How many people do you know have ever asked, God, what can I do for you today? How can I help you implement your will? Most people pass their lives asking God to save them, to help them, to protect them, to help others, to fix problems, and to punish people. People who live in pain and accept suffering as an integral part of their life and have weaved it into and all around their religion will always need to be saved. It's a vicious, self-fulfilling cycle. Living by this premise, not only do people look for a God who saves, but they also look to be saved by everything else in their world, or they want to be the heroic saviors themselves. The only person I have ever saved has been myself, and in doing so, I am the example of the humanity God wished to create, and a testimony of the power of real love. I'm not a religious person. I'm in love with God, and my faith is love, and my love is faith. It is an eternal bond that exists between us, which has never wavered, faltered, or waned, but has only grown richer and more intense as time passes. I'm not a religious woman, but I am in love, And I didn't speak about this love until God told me in 2018, now talk about me. Because my speaking about him was part of his plan, which had to unfold in 2020. So many people have asked me, how is it possible that you have been speaking with God all your life and you didn't tell everyone? If God had been speaking to me, I would have told everyone. Real love is personal, and when you are focused on who or what you are loving, that relationship is the most important thing in your life, not informing others. My life, my insight, my creating a cure for an incurable disease and healing myself in 6 months, and all the rest of my story is speaking for me. From 2020 on, let the path which you have chosen to take in life speak for you, not your words. When you understand how to love, and you really undertake the path of loving yourself, you will not want to speak, you will act, and your actions will boom in the world. This is the power of love. This is the power of God, and of really living his truth. God himself taught me how to love, not man. I'm not religious, I'm in love, and my whole life is a testimony to that unbreakable bond of love. There are many things about life and love which I hope people will start to rethink and contemplate on after 2020. As I conclude 2020 Check and Checkmate, I would like to leave you with something profound to contemplate as you live your life. In March 2019, God told me out of the blue, Jesus didn't have to die. God explained in a few words, as usual, that we all wrote that story and that Jesus' death was a version of a possible outcome, but it wasn't written. It happened because man did not know how to love, nor how to accept a message of pure love. During Jesus' life, we had the power to write another story, just like today in 2020. Jesus, out of pure love, however, was willing to die to show the power of faith and love for God and everything which God had created. Man has weaved a story of pain around a message of love to justify what was not written but became an ending which man himself wrote because our humanity did not comprehend love. From 2020 on, we are all once again writing our story, and the problem at the base of all mankind's problems is still love. God is love, and he has given us the power to write our story once again. You may freely choose man's version of life without direction, or you now have the information and the power to choose God's sublime paradise and stop the pain by learning the meaning of love and how to love. This is God's love put in front of you, and you must make a choice, just as people that day made a choice when they chose to condemn Jesus to death. God has told me on different occasions they do not know how to love. Not knowing how to love has and always will condemn man to pain, sickness, and suffering, and self-destruction. People who do not love themselves permit themselves to live in sickness, suffering, and pain, and through their passivity, aggressivity, and hate will always create a world of destruction. Now you know the truth. You now possess 2020 vision. I've made my move, now it's your turn. Your next move, how the year 2021 will unfold, and if humanity will face check and checkmate in the future, all depends solely on you. You possess the power to save humanity by loving yourself. You are the future. You are humanity's future. Our future is love. Our future depends on you loving yourself as God is loving you.